It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you can just contact me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our guest today is Jefferson Morley. Now, you could find him at jfkfacts.substack.com. He's also on Twitter at Jefferson Morley. He's also got a website, jeffersonmorley.com, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, that's very funny. Author of many, many books about the CIA, Scorpion's Dance, the Presidents, the Spymaster, and Watergate. Another one, main one, is Our Man in Mexico, Winston Scott and the Hidden History of the CIA, The Ghost, The Secret Life of CIA Spymaster, James Jesus Angleton. Incredible work working on the CIA. Jefferson Morley, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks for having me, Ed.
No, thank you so much. And the audience should know Jefferson Morley's a cool guy. He's not a diva. I had to ask him to reschedule at the last second. He was very accommodating to me, so I really appreciate that. Who is Jefferson Morley? Explain to the audience, who is Jefferson Morley?
So I am a career Washington journalist. I've been in Washington journalism for about 40 years. As an editor at liberal weeklies like The New Republic and The Nation. I spent 15 years as an editor and reporter at The Washington Post. I've worked for Salon, Slate. I've written freelance for New York Review of Books, American Prospect, lots of publications. So my specialty is the CIA. My 3 books, which you mentioned, concern the early days of the CIA from its founding in 1947 through the mid-1970s. My journalism more widely is about the national security agencies and the intelligence community, but that's by no means all that I do. I've also written a book about the early history of Washington, D.C., Snowstorm in August. So I'm a career Washington journalist and especially interested in the JFK assassination, which I write about at jfkfacts.substack.com, covering the latest developments in the JFK story. So that's, kind of who I am.
Also do speaking engagements, too. If people want to go to jeffersonmorley.com, you can hire him as a speaker to come speak at your event. Edits and publishes books for upcoming authors. Great source. Let me ask you a question, though. You've chosen your life's work to be a study of intelligence and central intelligence agencies. Any repercussions?
No. People ask me that all the time. Am I afraid? No. I think that it's very easy to overestimate one's importance. I think if you start worrying about things like that, you can get into a spiral of paranoia, which I think life's too short. I don't want to do that. I do think that taking a hard look at intelligence agencies on something like the JFK assassination is, not beneficial to a career in the mainstream media. Right. But that's, to me, that's par for the course. If you say things that are not popular with people in power, that's going to affect you. I never let that bother me because I always felt that if people looked at my journalism, they would see that it stood on its own merits, and I didn't have anything to worry about or apologize for. And I've had a long, good career in journalism. I'm trusted by senior mainstream news organizations. I'm proud to say that. When I had a big JFK story last year, I was covered by CBS News, NBC News, CNN, Fox News, Newsmax. I get good coverage across the board ideologically, and I'm very proud of that.
And how much do you find intelligence influence in the mainstream media?
Well, that's real. I mean, yeah. I don't look at it as a conspiratorial phenomenon, I look at it as a cultural phenomenon. Mainstream news organizations are, almost by necessity, somewhat aligned with the government, and especially on intelligence issues. In order, if you want to cover the CIA for the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you need to have access to agency officials. And if you are too skeptical or adversarial towards those officials, you don't get access and you can't really cover them. So there is a kind of built-in bias towards the government in media, especially in large news organizations. That's a reality. Does that mean the CIA has infiltrated the media? I mean, they have in the past. We know that. Is that going on now? I think we'd be foolish to deny the possibility, but I'm not going to assert that that's true if I don't have any evidence of it. So, to me, the bias is a cultural and institutional phenomenon, not a conspiratorial phenomenon. I don't rule out the conspiratorial explanation, but I think that, it's a common culture, and people tend to identify with the government for a variety of reasons. I don't think that that's necessarily corrupt, but it's real.
Yeah, I get that a lot. How dare you speak to so-and-so? and treat them with respect after they're ex-FBI or ex-CIA. How dare you, Ed? And treat them like a normal or human with respect. What do you find more oppressive in your reporting? Capitalist interests or intelligence interests?
I don't know. I don't know quite what capitalist interests mean.
Financial interests, financial motives.
Well, I mean, both are present.
Yeah.
News organizations are profit-making institutions for the most part. So that's, going to figure in the culture of a news organization, even if only indirectly. In the coverage of the intelligence agencies, I think that the influence of the intelligence agencies is probably more pronounced than commercial interests.
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, so now your body of work is incredible, covering intelligence and CIA. Incredible list of books we just mentioned before. How would you like to start on exploring all that you've learned?
Well, I think maybe I could start by talking about Scorpion's Dance.
Okay.
Which was published last year in June of 2022, and is really a story. It's two stories. It's the story of the CIA and Watergate, as told through the story of the relationship between Richard Nixon, the 35th President of the United States, and Richard Helms, the 8th Director of the CIA. Helms was CIA Director in 1968 when Nixon was elected and served for the entirety of Nixon's first term. The Watergate break-in happens at the end of Nixon's first term, and 6 months later, Helms is forced out as CIA Director. But I think that what Scorpion's Dance tells you is really the origins of the Watergate affair, which I think originated in this relationship between Helms and Nixon. It's different than the usual Watergate history because it doesn't begin with the break-in. The story actually begins with when the relationship between Helms and Nixon begins, which actually goes back to 1956. And I don't think you can understand what happened in Watergate without understanding the relationship of Nixon and Helms from 1956 up until the evening of June 17th, 1972. That backstory of the relationship between these two men, two very different men, explains a lot about what happened at Watergate and what was really going on. So that's my entree into the story here, and I think that it speaks to a couple of things that are distinctive about my reporting, okay? First of all, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't have a conspiracy theory about any of these. Was Watergate a conspiracy? Absolutely. It definitely was. There's no theory about it. But that's not my approach, is to develop a theory and then find facts to fit it.
Right.
I try and lay out the record very completely and then look for the patterns of behavior that explain the motive forces of major events in our life. So a couple things about Scorpion's Dance that I think are important is, one, the central role of the struggle for power in Cuba over what happened in American politics over the next decade. The CIA's efforts to assassinate Fidel Castro and overthrow his government, which failed, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the assassination of JFK, and the Watergate affair all originate in the struggle for power in Cuba. And so I think that's an important thing to understand. And so, for example, where did the Watergate burglars come from? Well, it was Helms who provided the Nixon White House with the burglars. Howard Hunt, the chief burglar, was a very good friend of Richard Helms, something that the Washington Post and the congressional investigators mostly missed or didn't understand, because it was very skillfully covered up by Helms himself. Hunt in turn recruited his friends from the CIA's failed invasion at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. So the burglars were associated with that policy going back 10 years before the break-in. 6 of the 7 burglars were associated with the CIA's efforts in Cuba. So that was an ideological project of the CIA starting in 1961, and it carries over right through to the Watergate affair, where, as I said, Helms provides the Nixon White House with these burglars a year, as I explain in Scorpion's Dance, a year before the burglary. Helms recommends Howard Hunt to H.R. Haldeman, Nixon's chief of staff, saying he's quiet, he's ruthless, he's effective. Okay, so it is on Helms's recommendation that the Nixon White House turns to Hunt to carry out its political dirty tricks against Nixon's enemies. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a series of facts, and it explains a lot about what happened. And it also explains some of the shortcomings of the Watergate history as conveyed by the movie All the President's Men, which mentions the CIA exactly once and then never mentions it again. When you look at the whole historical record, in fact, the role of the CIA in the Watergate affair was much larger than that and is quite important.
Boy, where to start? What do you make of Doug Caddy, the first attorney for the Watergate burglars?
I interviewed Doug Caddy for the book. He's an interesting character. Doug Caddy was a friend of Howard Hunt's. He worked at the Mullen Company. Caddy told me the story of how Hunt had recruited him for CIA work, which Caddy turned down because he was a gay man and he was not willing to come out publicly with that at that time. And he felt if he worked for the CIA, that would come out in terms of getting a security clearance. And so Caddy turned Hunt down. But what Caddy's story told me was that Hunt, although nominally worked, out of the CIA after 1970, was in fact continuing to work for the CIA in an undercover capacity right up to the time of the Watergate burglary, which makes a hash of the CIA statements that these were men who retired and we had no dealings with them since. That was a lie. Helms had lots of dealings with Hunt and James McCord after their retirement and before the burglary. So I thought Caddy was a useful witness and a good source for one piece of the story.
Yeah, very likable fellow too. I did the first radio interview with him, and he's like 10 years ago. A very likable guy. What do you make about these theories about the Watergate burglars also being involved in the JFK assassination, since that's your specialty?
I mean, I've looked at those theories. I don't see that there's much to them. I mean, it is interesting that at the end of his life,